Great. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We at our Working for Wildlife webinar. Very excited to hear from Vermont Land Trust and the Xerces Society tonight. I am Isabel Bowman. I work for the Windham County Natural Resources Conservation District, and I'm the conservation specialist. And before we get into the presentations, I wanted to share a little bit of background as to how this webinar came to be and why we're here. There we go. And first, I always like to start with what's a conservation district because we're an interesting kind of entity. We are one of 14 conservation districts in Vermont. Conservation districts actually exist all over the country. And the goal of conservation districts are to steward land and water for the future. We help people connect to organizations, state and federal, to get resources on the ground, assistance. We also act as a form of local government. We are technically a municipality, which will come up in a second. Our mission is to engage the community in being good stewards of the natural environment. And we do this by going to site visits with landowners or land stewards, land managers, going out, talking with people, connecting them with their financial resources or technical assistance. We also provide educational resources, so webinars, workshops, but also flyers, things like that throughout Windham County. And we also serve as a connection between the state and federal government at a local level. We help communicate concerns to who they need to go to, which brings me to our local work group. We actually had our local work group meeting yesterday, which is a great meeting. What happens is every year the Conservation District does a survey of Windham County. Anyone who works, plays, lives, enjoys Windham County is free to take the survey. And the goal is to identify natural resource concerns that the community has so that we can work on addressing them or relaying information properly as we're sort of that connecting piece. And we take this information to the local work group who helps identify where they can put funding. So for example, in the past few years, we've identified forestry as a huge need for financial assistance. And so we've been able to write a local fund pool to help get forestry management plans and forest health practices on the ground. And I say all this because for many years we have had wildlife as the second most common resource concern in Windham County. So in addition to us sending this information to get funding, we also want to have our webinars and things people are interested in be reflected in our programming. So I am very excited to have with us Allaire Diamond from the Vermont Land Trust and Julie Michaelson from the Xerces Society. So what we're going to do is have Allaire speak first and then Julie, and then I'll talk a little bit about what the district does, and we will open it up for questions. So I'll stop sharing. Feel free to add stuff in the chat, and at the end we'll go through those questions, comments.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Allaire Diamond, and I am the Ecology and Restoration Program Director with Vermont Land Trust. And I was really excited about this webinar opportunity just because it's exciting to think about how the conservation and restoration work we do at Vermont Land Trust really does work for wildlife. Like it's the idea of working for wildlife is really fun for me to think about. We are a working land trust. We conserve primarily farmland, forest land, and community lands. And those places do a lot of work for people. They also do a lot of work for our natural world. So I'm going to share my screen and share. Really, I'm going to be focusing on beavers tonight in terms of the wildlife that we are kind of the keystone species and a lot of the wildlife that they help to promote. Let me share.
Don't forget dinner. Just the timing of it, honey.
I think just if everyone can put their Zoom on mute, that would be helpful just not to have kind of background reverberations and things like that. Okay, can everyone see my screen? And I'm trying to.
Yes.
Okay,
And I will
awesome.
be muting if things happen. So,
That's great. Um, Great. Well, yeah. So Vermont Land Trust, we're a statewide land trust. We hold conservation easements on over 600,000 acres in Vermont, and that's about 11% of the state. We also own a couple thousand acres. That's always shifting, and that is our places where we can do like more targeted work. So when Isabel approached me about this webinar, I immediately thought about beavers. Beavers are kind of the thing that I'm just the most excited about these days. So I want to share a little bit about how our work with conservation and restoration promotes beavers and how then that helps beavers promote habitat for so many other species. So I love this picture. This is an very old beaver chewed stump that I found, and it just had this little microcosm in it, and I just thought it was lovely. So why I am really focused on beavers in our restoration program at Vermont Land Trust is that beavers really create a lot of habitat. They create wetlands, they create ecosystems, natural communities, habitats, and they provide a lot of flood and climate resilience for us. Um, so as Vermont Land Trust over the last 6 or 7 years has really been developing an ecological restoration program. Beavers have naturally become kind of a central pivoting point around that, to the point where we actually have a strategy for restoration that involves beavers that is really what I'm going to be talking about tonight, and also sharing a few specific examples in Windham County. So some of the things that beavers do to create these habitats and these wetlands is they build dams. I think people know about that. They excavate canals in association with those dams. They cut trees. Those are often result in trees growing back multiple stems, so they're coppicing those trees and producing these really dense settings. So this picture is a spot up in Franklin County where there's just a lot of willow, and a lot of those willows, if you look closely, they've actually been cut down by beaver and then grown up with many more stems, which is why it looks so dense in there. The impact of the work that beavers do is that they store, slow, and spread water behind their dams and in their canals out into the sides of those wetland systems and those stream systems. They reconnect groundwater and surface water. They provide structural complexity with all of that woody material, fine material, coarse material, the dams themselves, their lodges. There's just a lot of complexity in those settings that without beavers would just maybe be a really kind of just a simpler system. They provide a lot of habitat, like I said, habitat for aquatic and terrestrial wildlife. Beaver complexes also store carbon, sediment, and nutrients. Um, I wanted to find a picture that really showed just like what's the impact of beaver on the other species around. This is a picture that was created in Europe, so some of the species are not ones that we have here in Vermont, but we actually do have a lot of these species, and then we have analogs to them. So it's just like a great image. I'm not going to go through it specifically, but basically any animal that you can think of that relates to water and wetlands and streams in our region is connected to beaver in some way. Um, so whether they're feeding on a plant that grows behind a beaver dam or in the wetlands associated with it, whether they are nesting, excavating cavities and then nesting in snags, like great blue herons often really have their rookeries in beaver behind beaver dams. Um, Kingfishers, birds that excavate cavities, all of those, obviously aquatic animals, salmon and smaller mammals like muskrats and otters and minks, all kind of use beaver wetland complexes. There has been some, I think, controversy over the years or just misunderstandings around the impact of beaver on like fish, like trout and salmon that move up and down streams. There's a lot of research now that's showing the benefit of beaver complexes in creating just really wonderful cold water systems for those fish as they move through their life cycles. Um, Beavers can come and start using an area really, really quickly. This is a picture I took like 2 weeks after the floods in 2024 in Stowe on a large stream there where we have an easement, and everything had washed out and kind of been blown out in that storm. You can sort of see how it looks a little bit scoured in the background of that picture. But This was all recent. You can see the leaves on these alders are even green. So beavers had just immediately gotten right back out there and started building a dam. They use rocks when they start to build their structures, and then they start to take sticks of different sizes and orient them in a really particular way. I think this picture is just really fascinating because I think a lot of us see beaver dams when they are done or older. And it was really fun to see this one that was just like a baby beaver dam. Like there was not a beaver dam here previously. There was one 2 weeks after this flood. So it's just interesting to see how they start to work. And you can see that it's already raised the water level behind it a few inches and kind of changed how the water is sitting in that area and able to spread out into the floodplain because it's not being funneled into a small stream right away. So just really incredible impact there. And you can imagine how that can create habitat for all kinds of other associated animals. I think eventually we are maybe familiar with a large beaver wetland complex. This is one in Dorset on conserved land. And I really like, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but I can count several beaver dams in this picture, at least four. There's one here, there's one here, one over here, and then one down here in the lower right. So those are all dams that are spreading water out. But then what's kind of cool about this picture is that there's also all these little small lines that are going sort of up and down the system and also out to the edges. Those are canals that beavers excavate, and they're actually moving earth to do that. So they're digging little canals in these wetland complexes. That's creating places of deeper water and shallower water, and where they kind of dig up the muck and put it on the side. There's sort of wetland soil there that can grow other kinds of plants. So they're creating these really complex systems through their canal digging as well as their dam building. And that canal work is just more recently starting to be understood. And it's really interesting. I'm so excited to see what else, what we learn. But really, like this picture again shows it really well that the canals are kind of like beavers are awkward when they move on land. The canals are ways for them to move in water to get to the edges of the complex where they can get trees and material. That's primarily like the basic understanding of why they have canals, and then to move through the system and transport things through it. So yeah, it's just so fascinating how they're moving and creating these things. Another thing I like about this picture is that it's just showing how with the different like color gradations you can see in it. This is a wintertime picture, obviously, with ice. The white is ice. Um, those are all different places where the water is a different depth. There's different kind of plant community. Just again, habitat for different kinds of animals, and just complexity. I think like this wetland system has shrubs, it has trees, it has herbaceous plants, it has things that are like aquatic plants that don't even have a root system that's in the ground. There's all of that is there, and it's all because of the beaver. Um, and so I think like when we're in Vermont thinking about what we're going to do at Vermont Land Trust, when we're working with either a conserved landowner or a land that we own, we're thinking about going from this image that's in the upper left of this picture, this diagram, kind of we're trying to move toward the bottom right. So the upper left is what we see a lot of in Vermont, where it's like a single thread channel. It's very deeply cut. That is a result in many cases of just like past erosion. Maybe the land didn't have trees or forests along the edges. It was maybe eroded in dramatic flood events, things like that. We have a lot of streams. Probably most of our waterways in Vermont have some level of just this deep cutting, which we call incision. We are working in a lot of different ways. Beaver work is one way, to try to have those systems be broader, slower, have more complexity in them in terms of the beaver dams and the vegetation and natural wood, different kinds of wetland and other plant communities, so that water can move more slowly through the system. So that's our general kind of what we're trying to see. I'm going to skip this one for right now, but in general, there's this thought of just like these blue blobs on these pictures are kind of like wetland areas. Without those, you just have these like lines in our systems, and we're trying to restore our watersheds to have more of those wetland areas that would have been there before humans really came in, trapped beavers, and did a lot of land clearing and settlement. So there's a lot more to discuss with this picture, but in general, we're trying to like make more of those blue blobs. So this is our strategy. Vermont Land Trust Restoration Program has a strategy called Inviting Beavers Back. And it has 4 parts, and I'm going to spend most of my time on one of them, but I'll share all 4 of them. And we're just thinking like we're in a state where there used to be a ton of beavers, then there were no beavers when they were trapped and the sort of the height of land clearing and settlement. Then beavers started to return. Then we're here today. We have a lot of beavers. We could have more beavers. And they're really key to us being resilient in the face of climate change and the other threats that we face in the future. So our strategy has four parts, like I said. The first part is to give beavers space. Um, do not feel like you need to read this small text. It's just snips from our conservation easements that provide protection for wetland areas and streams. It does not specifically mention beavers, but we're talking about the values of wetlands and streams. Those are the wetlands are often places that are managed and created and enhanced by beavers. So when we work with a landowner to create a new conservation easement, we include this language in that easement. So the wetlands and a buffer along them, the area along them, are protected with special protections beyond kind of some of the other parts of the land. So that's like a legal way that we give beaver space. Then we work on when we need to. This isn't always, there's like just certain specific conditions when this is needed, but we use what we call coexistence strategies. And so many of you might be familiar with something called like a beaver flow device, or this is one that's like a sort of a Skip Lyle, who is actually I guess he's in Windham County, he's in Grafton, has created a product called a beaver deceiver. That's kind of like his specific product. This is a device that actually can be installed in a pond or an area where beavers are like they're not coexisting well with humans. They're damming up a culvert, or they're damming a bridge, or they're damming some kind of situation where then water is flooding out over like somebody's driveway or a field or something like that. There's this pretty cool strategy that Skip has developed, and now others are doing as well, where you kind of trick beavers to not come and dam up those culverts. Happy to talk more about that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it tonight, but basically, when we say we want to invite beavers back, part of that is that we want to minimize the conflicts that beavers and humans have. They're just naturally going to come in conflict with each other because both species are very active in the landscape. So this is a way to just like keep beavers out of human culverts and other structures and let them live. They don't need to get trapped or killed. Humans can also have their things going on at the same time. So this is a great strategy when indicated. The thing I'm going to talk about for probably the most tonight is this third part of our inviting beavers back strategy, which is what I call beaver mimicry or habitat seeding, where we're kind of looking at places that maybe could have had beavers in the past and thinking like, let's invite them back, literally invite them back to these places. So by doing that, we're going to mimic their behavior, mimic the structures that they create. We know we're not going to do as good a job as them, but we're going to do that, do what we can, and then maybe they'll come back and take over those structures, or maybe the work that we do will just like have a little bit of the impact that beavers do, even though we're never going to be as good as them. So this is an example of the Hayward property in Westminster, where we worked in 2023 and 2024. This is not the clearest picture, but I think it's a good one taken upstream, looking down at this kind of man-made beaver dam. And you can see that it kind of looks like it's functioning like a beaver dam, but it's clearly not a beaver dam. It's one that was installed by us, by a group of folks who, many of whom are here in this webinar. And my goal is to do this in as many places as we can so that we can have the impacts of beavers, maybe even attract beavers to come back to these places. So I want to do a little bit of background on this property. So this is in Westminster. I found 1962 imagery of this, but focus on this little triangular area. This is McKinnon Road, and I'm forgetting the name of this road. This is like, yeah, maybe somebody who is familiar with it could tell me. It doesn't really matter. But anyway, McKinnon Road, there's this little stream in 1962. Just look at how this thing was just completely open. It's an open field. It just looks like a little line in Westminster West Road. It's on the right side of my screen. Westminster West Road and McKinnon Road. In the present day, this is like imagery, I think, from 2024 or maybe even 2025. That stream is still visible. There's a little bit more natural wetland around it over here because some of the farming practices changed on this property in that time. And we, through working with Isabel and Corey and others in the area, decided to focus on this property to do some beaver mimicry work. The landowners were really interested in that. And we also did that alongside planting trees along the edges of the stream. So the idea here was that we're going to regrow riparian forest, the streamside forest, and also build structures that mimic beavers so that we can recreate some more of those wetland values that beavers had brought here before. Kind of revert, like go back in time beyond like this period, 1962, when there was literally, it just looks like there's not really any natural function of this area other than water just like moving through. We want to slow water down, kind of enhance what's already going on here, where you see these dark areas of wetland, and then try to do some specific beaver techniques. Oh, I guess I should have come here, but this is just a little zoomed in image. You can see how dark this is, the stream. This is just a sign. It's like the stream is very incised. It's very deeply cut, several feet down and like narrow and almost down to bedrock in some places. And then it kind of opens out into a wetland down below. It's flowing from the top of the screen to the bottom. So we wanted to focus on this stream in building a bunch of beaver mimicry structures. We call them beaver dam analogs that would trap material, slow down water, and help to like rebuild the channel of the stream there. So some of the ways that we did this are we got a group of volunteers and folks out. Bob Himes is a professional who kind of specializes in some of this work. So we had a couple different techniques we used. Some of them are very kid friendly, as you can see on the left, where we took sticks, like willow stems and old pieces of firewood and all kinds of just material that was there. We try not to bring a lot of material with us, but look for local sources. In this case, we were really focusing on smaller pieces and then weaving live willow in between. The hope is that some of that live willow will actually be able to sprout and grow and produce its own kind of like living beaver dam. A little bit further downstream, we used some posts where we had to use a post pounder because of how dense and rocky the ground was here. So this is a hydraulic post pounder that's just like can really drive these posts into the ground. These are cedar, so we actually had to bring these from outside. And you can see here that we did 2 rows, like there's 1 row here and then 1 row here, and then we use these small pieces and other wood that was around to really fill in that space in between. So there's different techniques for how do we mimic a beaver dam. You see 2 of them here. This is a third one. That's 1 row of cedar posts with the willow in between. And this picture's a little blurry, but this was taken a few months after we installed these structures. And you can see that after a big rainstorm, it's a very small stream, but after a big rainstorm, it's really working to hold water and slow it down. It's spreading, you see the level here, upstream of it is higher than downstream. So that it really is functioning as a dam. The idea with beaver dams, I should say, is not to like fully trap water and create like a pond, but they're permeable. So water can move more slowly through them so that you don't have these giant flood events be so damaging. It's like it just slows down the water so it kind of percolates and trickles through in a slower way. So that's that project. I think I have another picture of it later in the presentation, but a second example of beaver related work that we did in Windham County is at the McCullough or the Whetstone Woods property in Brattleboro, where VLT owns this parcel. And I took off the layer here, but it's basically like, this is Whetstone Brook, it's Route 9, Meadowbrook Road kind of goes here. And Vermont Land Trust owns this piece that's on the east side of the brook with this field right along the brook and the woods up to the north of it. And then also this smaller piece over here that has this little bend of the brook just on the west side of the brook there. I found the 1962 imagery. You can see it's just more open, not a lot of trees along the brook at all. It doesn't actually look that different from today. But what we did here is we also did this kind of combined project of planting trees along the brook on this northern piece. I think that happened just this last spring. So that helps to create, great structural complexity and habitat for a bunch of animals, as well as slow down floodwaters. But then we did another beaver mimicry project in the woods over here. So not on Whetstone Brook itself, but on this small tributary that comes into it. And for that one, I just wanted to share, because it's kind of fun, like the planning process a little bit. My colleague Kyle Beer, who was an Eco-AmeriCorps member at the time, really got excited about this work and planned by going down and doing some assessment of the land, thinking about where we'd want to build structures and why. So I like this slide because it shows that he was thinking about putting structures where these like brown blobs are, because this looked like a little flood chute that would get activated when there's a rainstorm. And so we could build these structures to push water out into the side. I should say that this particular spot, we were looking to mimic beaver structures. We weren't looking to build something that beavers would probably come into just because we were in this forested setting. So we can use these techniques to create habitat in the woods as well as like in more open wetland settings. So this was sort of just like a little bit of the design thinking about this project. And then the next photo is just like what they actually did. So you can see that they did end up building structures here. Again, it was with these single posts, these rows of posts with wood in between. There's another one down here. These were with larger wood. So we use like little like site-specific techniques based on what we have on the ground, what we're trying to do, and we're able to drive water to go into the flood chute on the side over here. It was cool. I visited this project at the very end of the summer in September when we were in the middle of the drought. And even though it was built kind of in the early summer and there hadn't been a lot of rain all summer, there was still water in the system and it was definitely pooling behind these structures. So they were having an impact, and I'm really excited to see what it looks like in the spring. Um, for resources on how we mimic beavers, I use a bunch of resources. This is just a small sample of some of the really good ones I found. There's one kind of like the Bible is from Utah State University. It's called Low-Tech Process-Based Restoration of Riverscapes. It's wonderful. It's a little bit old. This is a brand new book that I just found that's really, really good. This is free online, called Low-Tech Process-Based Restoration for Upper Watershed. So really focusing on these really small streams that we end up working on at Vermont Land Trust, because we're working on like these, with private landowners, often it's not like giant rivers. And then there's a Vermont guidebook that's come out too. We are working with partners to create a network to help people learn how to do these techniques, to kind of mimic or replicate what we did down in Windham County. So I'm excited about that. For folks who are working in this world, look for that process-based restoration network to be coming pretty soon. So I shared the three, or I guess the beaver mimicry here. This is still part of that third pillar of our inviting beavers back strategy. So there's something we call adaptive management, which is like going back and fixing the things that we built. I think it's really important to note that like beavers get an A+ in adaptive management. They're living on site. They're going out and fixing their dams and their structures every, 24 hours a day. They could be on call to do that. We cannot do that as humans. So we kind of get a C in this. So our real goal here, like at the Hayward property, would be to have beavers come back. That would be great. If that's not possible, we can go out and like do things. It's like what we're doing is better than nothing, but having beavers come is 100 times better than that. Um, just another picture of one of these structures with the willow on the day that we were building them first. Um, and then finally, I want to just say the last pillar of our inviting beavers back restoration strategy is just to tell the story, and be patient. These things take time to develop. This photo shows a site up in Franklin County, where we did a project back in like 2007, and now it looks like this. Back in 2007, it was a dry, denuded, fully eroded, no beavers, no natural vegetation stream through the middle of a farm field. And now it's this beautiful complex, still surrounded by farm fields on both sides that are very productive and active, but there's this incredible beaver habitat and other habitat in between. So over time, these things really do come into play. This is just a final example. This is the piece of land in Dorset where I showed that really beautiful complex earlier on. Just downstream of that complex is this house. There was an old dam, that it was actually two dams, this one and this one. We did a restoration project to remove those dams and rebuild a stream. Right after we finished doing that project, this is what the stream looked like. Didn't have a lot of water in it because it was the end of the summer. It's hard to see in these pictures, but we added natural wood to the system so that it would slow and spread water out into some wetland benches that we also created. So we're incorporating these things into our restoration work. We also planted trees at the site, to like kind of combine all of it. And we're hoping that over time, these restoration projects that we do will end up with more of these incredible natural wetlands, that we just provide so many values and are so inspirational for all of us. So that is it for my presentation, and I am excited to hear Julie's, and then we'll be happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Yay, beavers. That was great. Thank you. I'm gonna try to transition into my slides now. So I won't be talking about anything cute and fuzzy, like beavers, although bumblebees, I feel like can be argued as maybe like the beaver equivalent, not in function, but in cuteness. Um, and then I'm gonna transition one moment.
I can attest you can pet a bumblebee very gently, and they are soft.
Yeah. When I was in college, I have I all the time I have this like real sensitivity to insect like just happenings all together. And if a bumblebee was cold, I would actually put it in my pocket, which I wouldn't advise. It's not good for bumblebees. But then they would warm up, and then I'd have like an active bumblebee in my pocket. And not a smart idea. But yes, they're friendly, but they can sting as well. So. Anyway, so my name's Julie. I am a pollinator conservation specialist and NRCS partner biologist, NRCS being Natural Resource Conservation Service within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I'll explain what all of that means a little bit later on in the presentation, but I wanted to start off just about this crazy name up here, the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, and what that means and what we do. So the Xerces Society is an international conservation organization focused strictly on invertebrates and their habitats, with invertebrates being anything without a backbone. So while a lot of our work is focused on insects, we also cover other invertebrates as well, like mussels as an example. And we started in 1971 by Robert Michael Pyle, who is a famous lepidopterist. So it was an organization of butterfly scientists committed to protecting butterflies from declining and extinction based off of the Xerces blue butterfly, which was the first butterfly to be lost, go extinct in the US due to known human activities and habitat destruction. But since that time, Xerces has grown into an organization protecting all invertebrates in their habitats, not just butterflies. And we have over, I think, 100 staff now in over 20 different states, doing work on all sorts of projects, which I'll be talking mainly about what my specific role is in New England, but I'll share a little bit about what's going on broader as well. Most importantly, though, we do not do this work in isolation. Our partnerships with scientists, agencies, farmers, companies, community scientists, people like Windham County Conservation District are really what enable this work to be effective and far-reaching. And then also, since we're a nonprofit, all the work is funded and supported by members and donors. So why is there an organization dedicated to insect conservation? I hope that's obvious to you that insects are important, but in case, maybe invertebrates are new to your vocabulary, I just like to lay out just how much we rely on insects, and really that our fate is inseparable to that of theirs because of the various ecological services that they provide that keep both terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems healthy and functioning. So insects, they help break down organic matter. They keep pest populations in check. They're at the base of the food web, supporting numerous other important wildlife as food. They disperse seeds. They filter water. And of course, pollinators get a lot of attention, and that's my main focus as well. But they pollinate, 75% of the world's flowering plants rely on a pollinator to, complete part of their reproduction cycle. This includes economically important crops like apples, almonds, chocolate, peppers, and even things like livestock forage like clovers and alfalfa. And in total, the estimated value of these services in the US alone back in the early 2000s, so not accounting for inflation, was about $57 billion per year. Unfortunately, though, for them and ultimately us, many insects, including many pollinators and those ecological services that they provide, are under threat. So declines of insect populations have been noted worldwide in multiple groups. And Vermont is no less immune to these declines, with over half of our bumblebee species either extirpated, imperiled, critically imperiled, or vulnerable, and 30% of our native bees either critically imperiled or imperiled. And I would say, especially these statistics come from the Vermont Center of Ecosystem Studies, their State of Vermont's Wild Bees and Vermont Butterfly Survey. But there's so much more that we don't know. So many other groups that just don't receive much attention that some of the studies, depending on the region, are linking to declines in their population, but we really need more data and research. So we have staff all over the country working on various projects related to invertebrate conservation. These are some friendly faces in the Northeast in particular, working on projects ranging from protecting beneficial insects from pesticides, conserving fireflies across the eastern seaboard, and creating policies at state and federal levels that will help protect invertebrate populations. So my job in particular is to provide technical support on this project called the Western New England Regenerative Agriculture Project, which is a regional conservation partnership program between the USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the main project partner, American Farmland Trust. It's always a bit tiring to say all those many different names, but it's important to know. So this project, this RCPP, that's the acronym for the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, incentivizes the adoption of regenerative agriculture practices by livestock operations in Western New England. What is regenerative agriculture? That's a complicated question to ask that I'm sure every single person might have a slightly different answer for. But in this report, we identify it as the suite of practices that actively restore the natural resources of the land. So in New England, some example practices of regen ag include agroforestry, or the intentional integration of trees into agricultural systems, like silvopasture, which is adding trees into open pasture, food forests, which is creating sort of these dense, diverse plantings of things with like maybe fruit-bearing, trees and shrubs, or nut-bearing trees and shrubs, maybe mushroom products, maybe ground cover, maybe there's also like cut stems and propagation materials that can come from that, but like these dense, really diverse plantings, and then alley cropping. So think of an orchard with rows of trees, and then some sort of cropping system within the alleyway, whether that be something like strawberries or something like some fruit-bearing shrub. But there are many other non-agroforestry regen ag practices, like crop rotation, reduced tillage, holistically managed grazing, conservation buffers, and cover cropping, that all kind of aim for these broader environmental benefits, things like protecting water quality, increasing soil health. And so my specific role in this project is to provide assistance on practices related to insect populations. And for the most part, this has entailed protecting habitat for beneficial insects like pollinators. And one really cool aspect of this project is that it spans multiple states, and sort of what the area is defined by is the watershed of the Connecticut River. So counties that are within this watershed are all part of this program. The livestock producers within these counties have access to these resources. And it's really cool just thinking about connecting resources across entire watershed, because it's an interconnected system, and what happens upstream doesn't stay upstream. We're all interconnected in this context. So my main job is to help farmers. In particular, my main job is to talk about insects, which is so much fun. And with farmers, when I go out to do site visits to get to know them and their operation, we talk more broadly about, what their both production and conservation goals are, what their hopes and dreams and stresses and nightmares are, and how insects might fit into either of those categories. And we always, when I'm out at a site, there's a lot of different things to be considering and talking about with farmers. So I'm there to help sort of narrow down that process for them, to help them figure out opportunities that make the most sense, for their goals, and that will yield the greatest conservation benefit to beneficial insects as well. At the core of creating healthy and resilient agricultural ecosystems is diversity. Biodiversity relies on resource diversity, which is a product of different habitats within the landscape. So like, with beavers, what species of beaver creates in like a wet meadow, in a wetland type habitat? What invertebrates will be found in that will be very different than what's found in an upland forest. And then considering the different processes that get us to those points, like different types of natural disturbance, whether that's beaver, whether that's fire, that help maintain the variety in our landscape. And then the spatial characteristics and arrangement of habitats. That's all a lot to, like, at a landscape scale, that's a lot to wrap your head around. And, as farmers, they're already managing a lot. So we come in, we bring some of that landscape context, and then we do the more fine scale considerations for insect populations in that grander scheme of things. And we have tools to help us do this, like habitat assessments that help figure out the current condition of their property and surrounding area for target beneficial insects like pollinators. And then, with that data, we come up with feasible conservation actions that can help farmers achieve those conservation and production goals. Then the less fun part is I go back inside into my desk and put a plan together. This is still fun, but I just require sitting down and not looking at insects. And I'm making these plans to follow design guidelines and standards set by the USDA NRCS, to hopefully help if farmers are interested in cost share opportunities. They can use these plans to help facilitate the design to enter programs that will give them sort of more financial incentive to do these sorts of practices. So the details I put together is, comprehensive plans regarding, custom plant lists according to the site's conditions, plant quantities and design ideas, as well as the step-by-step, methods it takes to establish whatever, practice we're talking about. So if they want to do a wildflower meadow, how do we get to that end point? How do we go from like a cool season grass pasture to a really diverse warm season grass, wildflower meadow from scratch? What are the pitfalls? What are the financial considerations? And then what are the long-term management considerations? And then, is that really going to be of the greatest conservation value? Maybe they have an existing area of pollinator habitat on the property that can just be enhanced through management tactics for pollinators. So here's an example of just like a diagram from one of the reports that I put together for a farmer. This was for a livestock operation that very similar to that in Allaire's presentation, that stream that kind of cut through that open, field and was like very channelized. This livestock operation had a very similar like stream. It was very deeply cut in the pasture. It had been repeatedly grazed. So the non-native cool season grasses were quite short. They likely had very weak root systems. That's just not providing the level of, both flood mitigation, runoff filtration, all these sorts of things that we're looking at for riparian buffers to provide. And even more so, we're in a pasture, so nutrients like from the cows, from their dung pats are running off, directly into the stream with little to no vegetation to absorb and pick it up. And then they might also be treated with insecticides for external or internal parasite control, which can pass through the animal, end up in the dung pat, and flow into our water system. So a riparian buffer makes a lot of sense in the system, not only for the water body, but also for that cool season grass, area, which maybe provides some forage for the livestock, transitioning it into a really diverse plant community beyond just pasture grasses and providing pollen and nectar, fruits and nuts, butterfly and moth host plants, like deadwood, stems, and other materials for nesting and overwintering, for terrestrial organisms, as well as for the aquatic macroinvertebrates that are in those water bodies, using it as habitat for hunting and all sorts of things. And it's always about working with the farmer. We have set standards and goals of like how we want these designs to go, but sometimes farmers have a lot of constraints. They have, mouths to feed, they have bills to pay. They can't sacrifice all their land, strictly for wildlife conservation. So in this case, this farmer could sacrifice 35 feet on either side of the stream, which was great. And we could really fit a lot of diversity into that width. And that was a huge improvement compared to what it was. So when designing these systems, pollinators are top of the mind for me. I'm selecting native flowering resources that provide all the structural benefits of a riparian buffer, all while creating terrestrial wildlife habitat. So like here are some examples of native plants with high pollinator value that will be suitable for that transitional habitat along the stream. One major consideration is that pollinators need floral resources throughout the entire growing season. So we always are creating plant lists with a diversity of plants to provide a succession of bloom from early spring to late fall. And in the spring, usually that can be accomplished through a woody component. Many of our temperate zone trees and shrubs like willows or maples flower early in the spring and are providing some of those first pollen and nectar resources of the season, which is really valuable for boosting those early season pollinator populations when a lot of herbaceous resources aren't yet out. And not many trees and shrubs flower later in the summer and the fall. So that's where the herbaceous species, having a herbaceous component to those designs, is really important. So things like swamp milkweed or goldenrod and asters, providing the bulk of pollen and nectar resources later on in the growing season. So incorporating both into those designs creates more continuous foraging opportunities for pollinators, creates a more complex underground network of roots to absorb runoff and limit erosion, and provides diverse resources for the aquatic environment as well to be used by the aquatic macroinvertebrates like stoneflies, dragonflies, caddisflies, those sorts of organisms. But really important to me is merging this with human livelihoods. So, how can we think about design for wildlife like pollinators and humans too, not only to encourage, farmers to be excited about these things, but, have some, it's good to have some financial incentive to do conservation. So like wet areas of pasture as an example, that's an area that whenever I go out to a farm, I'm like, have my eye set for like grazed wet areas. And like we have a lot of farms that are converting those areas into like native shrub plantings, often like really dense native willows, like Bebb's willow, that could be used as leaf fodder in periods of drought and can be coppiced, like that function that those beavers are doing, providing more stems. And is really good for increasing resiliency in our food systems too, because those cool season grasses that are grazed by livestock aren't faring too well in the midsummer, maybe when we're in a drought. So where can we look at other resources in the landscape to keep livestock, away from dried hay or feed and still foraging in our landscape for resources that are also being maintained as wildlife habitat too. So that being said, I work on a lot of those agroforestry related projects. So integrated trees and shrubs into crop and animal farming systems to create environmental, economic, and social benefits. And this is, not inherently, it benefits wildlife by just creating perennial systems over annually tilled cropland, like with high needs for chemical input, but it also maintains and improves habitat connectivity and expanding that resource availability and diversity. And then as an extension of this work, I'm working with conservation districts in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts to provide free trees and shrubs with pollinator value to livestock producers. So this program is sort of geared to merge agroforestry design and all the hype that it's, the sort of excitement that farmers have about it right now, and really pushing the conservation benefits of it too, and optimizing design for native wildlife, as well as to make it easier and more affordable for farmers to integrate specifically native trees and shrubs into the farm design. So this has also entailed fun plantings with the farmers, as well as like biodiversity monitoring. So we've been doing some pollinator and dung beetle monitoring out in pastures to help livestock operations understand the value of the current condition of their land for beneficial insects and the practices that can be done to enhance that benefit. So that's just kind of one specific example with livestock producers. But if you're interested in learning more about what Xerces does, please check out our website. We have tons of free resources on insect conservation, invertebrate conservation, from bumblebee ID and creating wildflower meadows to neat monitoring tools and agroforestry. And if you're interested in supporting our work, of course, we have one-time and monthly membership opportunities that are always appreciated. So thank you. And thank you, Isabel, for inviting me to talk about insects today.
Always great and always good to hear what is going on. And yeah, I love what you said about, I mean, everything, but the when you're talking about planning, that's something that we often work with both Xerces and Vermont Land Trust when we're doing projects. We talk about like I think when I first got into this position, the idea of a tree planting seemed so simple, but really like planning out details can be very beneficial for wildlife. I'm going to go
Yeah.
pretty quick on just like what the conservation district does, and then we'll take the questions that we have in the chat. One of the many things we do for wildlife at the Conservation District is to manage introduced plants or invasive plants. They can take over ecosystems, deplete resources for wildlife, and make habitats just less usable. So we do a lot of mapping. We have early detection plants. If anyone sees this plant right here is a cocoa vine. It's a one that we've only found in one space so far in Vermont, and we were able to report that to the state. But because it's so new, it's one of the many that we want to be on the lookout for. We also do removal, mostly just by hand at different sites. We do outreach and education, and there's lots of ways we do that: workshops, webinars, etc. There we go. One exciting thing that we're doing is wetland restoration planning, which takes components of both what Allaire and Julie were saying. We're hoping to do some beaver dam analog stuff on site. And we are also planning for some specific wildlife there. So for example, at one of our sites, we have wood turtles, and you can plant specific things like they really like the color red. So if you plant red berried fruits or red stemmed plants, they are really excited and gravitate towards those. And then you can also plant for wood turtles, you can plant in clusters so that they have little areas where they can hide, and then they can walk out, get some basking time to get their temperature up, and then they can walk back in to some cover. So that's a example of it, something that we plan for. And I put on here a lot of stuff about small wetlands, but basically what you need to know is that they are great for even if they're only half an acre in size, restoring these wetlands on agricultural fields specifically can really help with mitigating nitrogen runoff. And then lastly, I will mention tree plantings. We do lots of these. We've done these on Vermont Land Trust land at the property Allaire was talking about actually both properties had tree plantings on them. And again, we focus on all different kinds of things to make sure that the plants are great there, but also that they're providing what is needed. I often it's great to think about the different seasons and what's going to utilize the plants in the different seasons and keep that in mind. We also have volunteers at these plantings, so we always encourage people to come and join us. And then we have our plant sale, which in the past 2 years we have done a plant donation program, or past year we've done that. We're going to do it this year in the hopes that we can share more native plants out there in Windham County. Um, Stop sharing. But I am gonna open it up for questions, which looks like we're already getting some back and forth. But the first question we had was for Allaire, which was about, so Debbie says, if our property has a stream of and is 66 acres, how can we look to see if it would benefit by a beaver?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wanted to wait and like respond in talking instead of writing something in the chat. So thank you for that question. I think it probably like 66 acres, probably a decent amount of stream moving through a piece of property that big, and so there's probably it probably would benefit from a beaver. Obviously, not knowing the particular setting, like is it a steep mountainous slope or is it like a lowland area with of like low flat valleys? Are there beavers there already? Are there beavers upstream or downstream? These are all like interesting questions. I think a lot of times when people came to Vermont after beavers had been trapped out of the state for the most part and really found that those former beaver meadows were very fertile and flat and lowland areas that were really great for farming. So sometimes like a field with a stream going through it, kind of like the property in Westminster that I showed, used to be beaver habitat. And like very clearly, like a wide, flat area that you could really imagine a beaver dam and imagine that area really holding a lot of water. Um, so that's something to look for. Other places where you might just have streams kind of cascading more down a steeper slope, they might be cut down. That picture that I showed where it's like a stream is very narrow and cut down almost to bedrock. Those are places where might not be an actual beaver that would want to be there, but there's beaver mimicry work that can help to reverse some of that erosion and rebuild that stream a little bit. So using the techniques of beaver, even if it's not an ideal habitat for actual beavers. So I think it's hard to say without, look like being there, but I think walk the stream, look for settings, look for old beaver evidence, and think about if you were a beaver, like is there a little a wide flat valley that maybe has a narrow point at the downstream end where a dam could be built and it could fill with water. So there's just kind of like thinking about the landscape from the point of view of a beaver is a fun exercise. But I think walking the stream and understanding kind of what are the different parts of that stream system is a great place to start. Are there wetlands? Is it steep? Is it rocky? Is it spongy? All those kinds of questions. And if you have conserved land, like that's a place where like I or one of my colleagues could potentially come out and check out the site as well.
And if it isn't conserved land, we'd also, as the conservation district, be happy to come out and take a look and see what we can work with. We are at time, but so I wanted to thank everyone for coming, but I will keep it open so we can see more answers to these questions. I was wondering for Norma's question if she was referring to the what was discussed at the Vernon meeting. Yeah. Um, yeah. Um, let's just see another chat. So it sounds like Julie does work with industrial scale solar installations, and that's a possibility, so that's exciting. Um, Julie, is there any preference on the plugs versus seed mixes other than what you added there?
No, yeah, I think it really depends on the site and kind of the current condition. Like obviously, like if you have a buffer, like if you're working on a riparian buffer, you want to be very cautious about any like soil disturbing practice. And so that's where plugs can be really advantageous for trying to establish some cover without, prepping a site to have exposed soil and that sort of thing. So, I've also had sites where like they already have like pretty bare soil from trampling. And so like establishing like a quick to establish like cover crop or something like that to get something to cover the soil and then transition into a more perennial wildflower seed mix. But yeah, so site specific, but and plugs are more expensive than seeds, more affordable, but yeah.
That definitely makes sense when we do plantings. Sometimes people think like the biggest, the best, but that doesn't always work for the sites. It might shock the trees, so there's all kinds of considerations there. Um, well, thank you all for joining and having awesome questions. I hadn't heard about Elijah's comment about the New York Times series, so we'll have to look into the Beaver Landscape Utah thing. This recording will be on our YouTube page. I'll have a little follow-up email to everybody. And we just want to, again, thank our presenters. I feel like I learned so much today, so I hope everyone enjoys that and stays warm. Have a good night.
Thanks. Thanks, Isabel. Have a good night.
Thanks, Isabel. Thanks, everyone.